The morning light touched the quiet town as Amir walked along the old street market with his small daughter Sanaa holding his hand, and he tried to hide the weight he carried inside his heart because life had not been easy for him ever since his family turned away from him and blamed him for things he never did and left him alone to raise his little girl. But Amir never allowed sadness to reach Sanaa because she was the only bright part of his life, and he wanted her to feel safe even when the world felt heavy for him. And that day he only came to the market to find a cheap jacket for winter, but fate had something very different waiting for him as he moved between the small stalls filled with books, clothes, and forgotten objects from people who no longer needed them. Amir stopped when he saw an old storage auction board placed near a broken table, and a man with a loud voice was calling people to bid on items left behind in a Billionaire storage unit, and the Billionaire was known across the city, but no one knew why he abandoned the large storage room filled with personal belongings, and yet no one had collected anything from it for more than a year, and now the company was selling it all to recover unpaid fees, and Amir had never joined any auction in his life. But something about the way the man announced the words made him curious, and even though he had very little money, he felt a strange pull, as if destiny pushed him to take one step closer. Sanaa tugged his hand and looked up with wide eyes asking if they could just see the items, and Amir nodded because looking was free, and maybe it would distract his mind from the worries that never rested. And when the auctioneer opened the door to the storage unit, everyone around gasped because the unit was huge and filled with boxes and antique trunks and furniture that looked old but valuable, and Amir felt a soft whisper inside his mind telling him this unit hides a story that will change something inside you, and he stood there wondering if he should walk away, but his feet refused to move. Bidding began, and people raised their hands with excitement shouting higher numbers, and Amir knew he should not speak because he barely had enough money to pay rent. But then he saw something at the back of the unit that made his heart slow down, and he could not understand why it affected him so deeply, for it was only a suitcase that looked very old, covered in dust, and tied with a cracked leather belt. Yet, when he looked at it, his chest tightened as if the suitcase was waiting for him, and no one else. And Amir never believed in signs, but something inside him woke up like a silent voice calling his name gently. The bidding slowed as buyers lost interest, thinking the Billionaire unit might not contain anything great or rare, and suddenly the auctioneer joked that maybe even a single dad could win the unit today, and people laughed without thinking, and Amir felt heat rise in his face because he knew the joke was about him, since everyone in the market knew his struggles and knew how his own family had turned their back on him after the hard time he faced. But Sanaa squeezed his hand tightly as if reminding him that he was not alone, and that small gesture gave him strange courage he did not expect. Without planning to do so, Amir raised his hand and said a number that seemed too big for him, but the moment he said it, silence filled the crowd because no one expected him to bid, and the auctioneer looked surprised but called out the number and waited for someone to bid higher, yet no one did because most people thought the unit looked like too much work and too much dust and maybe nothing valuable at all. And after a few seconds that felt like a whole minute, the auctioneer declared Amir the winner, and everyone watched with mixed looks, some surprised, some confused, and some simply amused. Amir stood there feeling unsure whether he made a mistake or something remarkable just happened, and Sanaa hugged his leg happily, saying that maybe they would find something pretty inside the boxes, and Amir smiled gently at her innocence because she believed every small thing in life could be a treasure, and he wanted to believe that too, even when life rarely gave him anything easy. He stepped into the storage unit and breathed in the scent of old paper and wood and time itself, and he slowly began to scan the space, but his eyes again returned to the old suitcase at the back, almost hidden behind a stack of broken frames, and he felt the same pull again, stronger now, like a whisper growing into a soft call inside his chest, and he walked toward it, feeling the air change around him as if everything else faded away. The suitcase felt strangely warm under his hand, even though it had been sitting untouched for years, and when he lifted it, dust rose in a quiet cloud, and Sanaa watched with curiosity as he placed it gently on the floor and untied the cracked leather belt around it, and Amir felt his heartbeat rising because he sensed the suitcase was not just an object but a doorway into something forgotten, something that waited for him specifically. He opened the suitcase slowly, and at first he only saw bundles of letters tied with ribbon, a small wooden box, and several photographs that seemed old and delicate, and he picked up one photograph and felt a jolt inside his heart because the picture showed a young man standing beside a woman holding a baby, and the scenery looked familiar, the hills, the small house, the old tree near the river, everything looked like a place from Amir's childhood, and he felt his throat tighten because he had not seen that place since he was a boy. He opened one letter carefully, and his eyes moved across the words written in fading ink, and suddenly his breath became unsteady, for the letter mentioned a family name, the same name that belonged to his mother, and the same name that belonged to the family that abandoned him long ago, and he felt a heavy wave rise inside him, and his hands shook slightly because he realized the letters were not random, they were connected to him in some unknown way. The world around him grew quiet, and he felt something change inside him, as if the past that he tried to forget was slowly walking back toward him, and he understood that whatever story was locked inside this suitcase was about to reshape his life in a way he could not imagine, and he stared at the letters, feeling both fear and hope mix inside his chest as Sanaa whispered softly, asking if he was all right, and Amir knew the journey had only begun, and he had no idea what truth waited for him next. Amir sat on the cold floor of the storage unit with the open suitcase in front of him, and the letters resting gently in his hands, and he felt as if time had slowed because every word he read pulled him deeper into a past he never understood, and he looked at the handwriting again, and again because it felt familiar, like something he had seen many years before inside an old drawer in his childhood home, and his breath grew slow as memories he buried long ago rose like quiet shadows. Sanaa sat beside him with her small hands on her knees, watching her father with curious eyes because she could see something was changing inside him, and she asked softly if the letters belonged to someone he knew, and Amir looked at her for a long moment before nodding slowly, because even though he did not yet know the full truth, something inside him whispered that these letters were connected to his own family, and that the suitcase held a story hidden from him since childhood. He opened another letter and began to read carefully, even though the edges were worn and the ink had faded, and the words spoke about pain and separation, and a young couple who had been forced to leave their land and their newborn child behind due to a difficult situation caused by a powerful family in the region, and Amir felt a strange coldness spread inside his chest because his own life had been shaped by similar pain when his family turned away from him without any chance to defend himself. And suddenly he wondered if the past he believed in was never the full truth. Amir placed the letters aside for a moment, and lifted the small wooden box from the suitcase, and it felt light in his hands yet strangely important, and he opened it slowly with a breath he did not realize he was holding, and inside he found a silver chain with a small round pendant, and when he touched it, he felt a sharp memory flash in his mind of his mother wearing something that looked just like this, although he could never be sure because he was very young when he last remembered her smile. He looked around the storage unit again, trying to understand why a billionaire would have these items and why they were connected to his own past, and the thought made him uneasy because he had always believed he came from a simple background with no link to wealthy or powerful people, and yet the letters hinted at a story that involved struggle and loss and someone trying to protect a child from harm, and Amir wondered if he was that child and if his whole life had been built on pieces of truth that were never given to him. Sanaa touched the pendant and said it looked beautiful and maybe it belonged to someone who loved them, and her words warmed his heart because even in moments of confusion she brought calmness to him, and he hugged her gently before setting the pendant back inside the wooden box, and then he returned to the suitcase where more photographs waited, and he picked up one that showed a young woman standing in front of a village house holding the same pendant in her hand as if showing it to someone taking the picture. The woman in the photograph had soft eyes and a gentle smile, and Amir felt a painful tug inside his heart because she looked very similar to the image of his mother he carried in his memory, and he closed his eyes trying to hold on to the memory, but it felt distant and fading like a dream he had tried to remember for many years, and he whispered a quiet question to himself, wondering if the woman in the photograph could truly be related to him in some way. He kept searching inside the suitcase and found another envelope larger than the others, and inside it, he discovered documents folded carefully and tied with ribbon, and he opened them with trembling hands and read the names printed on them, and his entire body stilled because one of the names belonged to a man he had only heard stories about, a man who was said to be powerful, wealthy, and distant, someone people whispered about but never approached, and the shocking part was that the name connected this man directly to the woman in the photograph. A heavy thought formed inside Amir's mind, and it frightened him because the documents seemed to describe a family line, one with ties to land, property, and old stories of conflict, and if the letters were true, then someone from his past had been forced to leave behind everything, including a child, to protect him from danger, and if that child was him, then everything he believed about being abandoned without reason was not the full truth, and instead it was a story shaped by fear and silence. He sat quietly trying to understand what this meant for him and for Sanaa because he wanted a peaceful life for them, and he feared that digging into the past might bring new trouble, yet he also felt that walking away from this truth would mean turning away from something important, something that could explain why his life had been filled with so much struggle and loneliness, and he wanted answers not just for himself but for Sanaa, who deserved to know where she came from. Minutes passed before he gathered the strength to stand again, and he began exploring the rest of the storage unit, because the suitcase was only the beginning, and he sensed there was more hidden inside the dusty boxes and wooden crates stacked around the room, and he opened one crate slowly, and found several notebooks filled with handwriting and maps of land that looked familiar because it resembled the region where he grew up and where his mother had once told him stories about a place their ancestors treasured deeply. As he flipped through the notebooks, he found a page describing a lost inheritance and a dispute within a powerful family over land ownership, and the words were written with emotion and regret, and it seemed like the writer was trying to save something precious for the next generation, and Amir felt his heartbeat grow heavier because everything pointed back to him and his mother, and the life they once had before he was taken away by relatives who never explained anything. He felt his legs weaken, and he sat again on a small wooden chair by the wall trying to breathe slowly while the truth settled over him like a thick cloud, and he realized the billionaire who owned this storage unit had kept these items for a reason, and maybe that reason had something to do with Amir, and maybe the billionaire knew the truth about Amir past. Sanaa looked at him with innocent eyes and asked if they had found treasure, and Amir smiled softly because to her everything was treasure, and in a way she was right because the letters, photographs and documents were more precious than gold since they held answers he had chased silently all his life. He picked up the suitcase again and pressed his hand gently on its surface, feeling the weight of hidden stories, and he understood that finding this storage unit was not an accident, but something meant to guide him toward a truth waiting for many years, and as he looked at Sanaa he knew he had to follow this path no matter how difficult it might become because the truth once opened could not be closed again. And deep in his heart he felt that the next step in this journey would change everything for him and his daughter, and he was not sure if he was ready for that change, but he knew he had no choice but to keep moving forward. Amir carried the suitcase out of the storage unit with careful hands while Sanaa walked beside him holding the wooden box with the pendant, because she insisted on helping, even though the box was light, and Amir looked around trying to understand how such simple-looking items could carry a story strong enough to shake him in ways he had never felt before, and he knew deep inside that this was only the beginning of a truth that had been hidden for many years, and now it was finally rising like sunlight after a long storm. He placed the suitcase gently in the back seat of his old car, and sat quietly for a moment with his hands on the steering wheel trying to steady his breath, because the letters, the photographs, and the documents all pointed toward one thing, a secret family connection to a man so wealthy and so distant that Amir could not imagine ever being linked to him, and it felt unreal, like a tale told by someone who wanted to create drama, yet the evidence was now in his hands, and he could not ignore it. Sanaa climbed into her seat and asked her father if they were going home, and Amir nodded before starting the engine, and he drove slowly through the busy streets, lost in thoughts and memories that stirred inside him like waves in a restless river, and he remembered moments from his childhood when he asked his uncles about his mother past, and they always changed the topic and told him not to ask unnecessary questions, and back then he felt confused. But now he began to understand that maybe they were hiding something important from him. When they reached home, Amir placed the suitcase on the small table in the living room and sat on the floor with Sanaa beside him because he wanted her to stay close as he explored the truth further, and he opened another stack of letters and saw dates that went back many years, even before he was born, and as he read the words he discovered that the family of the young woman in the photographs had once been in conflict with a powerful man who later became a billionaire, and the letters described heartbreak, separation, and a child taken away for protection. The more he read, the more he felt a strange fear and hope mix inside him because the child mentioned repeatedly seemed to be him, and the letters suggested that his mother had been forced to leave everything behind after a disagreement about land ownership that threatened the safety of their family, and she had hoped to return later, but circumstances never allowed it, and Amir felt tears rise in his eyes because he remembered the gentle smile of his mother and her soft voice telling him stories before she passed away when he was very young. Amir looked at the pendant again and held it in his hand, feeling a warm emotion flow through him because it felt like a piece of his mother heart still reaching out to him even after all the years, and he wondered how many secrets she carried and how heavy her life must have been living with pain she could never share with him, and he wished he could speak to her one more time and tell her he now understood she tried to protect him. As he continued searching through the suitcase, he found an envelope sealed with wax, and his hands shook slightly while opening it because he sensed it might contain something important, and inside he found a letter written by the billionaire himself, and Amir's stomach tightened as he unfolded the paper and began reading, and the words inside made his heart skip because the letter apologized for mistakes made in the past and expressed regret about the suffering caused to a woman who had once been close to him. The letter spoke about a misunderstanding that destroyed trust and separated families, and it mentioned that the billionaire had been looking for the missing child for years but never found him, and now Amir understood that the storage unit was not abandoned out of neglect but was kept safe as a painful reminder of a past the billionaire could not fix, and Amir felt frozen because the letter hinted that the billionaire might be connected to him in a way he never imagined. Sanaa placed her hand on her father's arm, asking softly if they had found something sad, and Amir looked at her gentle face and nodded slowly because the truth was not only sad but also powerful and life-changing, and he felt a heavy pressure inside his chest because he did not know how he should react to a truth that could rewrite everything he believed about his life. He leaned back against the wall and looked at the ceiling, trying to calm his mind because the idea of a billionaire searching for him felt surreal and confusing, and he wondered why that man never contacted him before, and why his family never told him anything, and he felt anger rise slowly, but he pushed it down because anger would not bring answers and he needed to stay calm for Sanaa's sake. As evening approached, Amir lit a small lamp and continued reading the notebooks from the storage unit, and he found pages describing the location of an old house that belonged to the young woman family and maps showing a river and a hill, and Amir's heart stirred because he recognized those places from his childhood memories, and he realized that the truth might be waiting for him in that region where he had once lived as a small boy. He decided he needed to go there and search for people who might remember the past or know something about his mother's story, and he looked at Sanaa wondering if it would be safe to take her along because the journey might bring unexpected challenges, but he also knew that he could not leave her behind because she was the only person he trusted completely, and he whispered to himself that whatever truth waited, he and Sanaa would face it together. He packed the letters and documents inside the suitcase again, arranging them carefully, as if protecting the fragile pieces of his own identity, and he felt a strange strength grow inside him because for the first time in many years he felt like he was walking toward something meaningful, something that could heal the emptiness he carried ever since his family abandoned him and broke his trust. That night Amir could not sleep, and he sat by the window watching the quiet street while Sanaa slept peacefully in her small bed, and he allowed his mind to run through every possibility and every fear because the truth could bring hope, but it could also bring more pain, and he was afraid of discovering that his mother's pain had been deeper than he imagined. But he also knew he could not turn away because the suitcase, the letters, the pendant, and the billionaire letter all pushed him toward a path he had to follow, and he closed his eyes, whispering a silent promise that he would uncover the truth no matter how difficult, and that he would protect Sanaa from any harm just like his mother once tried to protect him. As the first light of dawn touched the sky, Amir felt ready to begin the next step in this journey, even though he had no idea where it would lead, and he hoped that somewhere ahead he would find answers that could finally bring peace to his heart. The morning sun rose slowly as Amir packed a small bag with clothes, food, and the precious suitcase that now felt like a part of his heart, and he looked around his small home knowing that when he returned nothing would feel the same because truth once seen could not be unseen, and he gently woke Sanaa, who rubbed her eyes and asked in her soft voice if they were going on a trip, and Amir nodded because he wanted her to feel excited instead of worried, and he told her they were going to visit a place from his childhood, a place that might help them understand more about their past. They left the town in Amir's old car, and the road stretched ahead like a long quiet path leading into memories he had avoided for many years, and as they drove he told Sanaa simple stories about the river where he once played, the hill where children used to climb, and the little market where his mother used to take him, and Sanaa smiled, imagining all those moments as if they were scenes from a gentle dream, and her smile gave Amir courage because he feared the truth, but he knew he could face anything as long as she was beside him. After several hours the landscape changed into open fields and tall trees that swayed gently in the wind, and Amir felt a tightness in his chest because the air smelled like his childhood, and each sight touched something deep inside him, and he remembered his mother singing as she cooked and the soft comfort of her presence, and he wished she were alive to tell him the truth herself, but now he had to search for answers on his own. They reached a small village where old houses stood close together, and the people looked at Amir with curious eyes because they did not recognize him at first, and he stopped near a shop where an elderly man sat outside reading a newspaper, and Amir approached him with respect, asking if he knew a young woman who once lived near the river and had left the village many years ago, and the moment the man heard the woman's name his eyes widened with surprise. The man looked closely at Amir's face, and after a long moment he said quietly that Amir looked exactly like her, and he asked Amir where he had been all these years and why he never returned, and Amir felt a heaviness in his throat as he explained that he had been taken away as a small child by relatives, and he never understood why his life changed so suddenly, and he asked the man if he knew anything about the conflict mentioned in the letters. The old man sighed deeply, and said that many years ago the village had been caught in a dispute between a rich family and a humble family because of land that held emotional value, and the powerful man who later became a billionaire claimed the land for expansion, while the young woman family refused to give it up, because it had been in their family for generations, and tensions rose until one day the young woman disappeared with her child and no one saw her again. Hearing this made Amir feel as if the ground beneath him shifted because the story matched the letters exactly, and he asked the man if anyone knew what happened after she left, and the old man shook his head sadly, saying that her family waited for her return, but life moved on, and they had no way to find her, and over time the story became a quiet memory that people rarely spoke about, but the pain still lived in the hearts of those who remembered her. Amir thanked the man and walked toward the river with Sanaa holding his hand, and when he reached the riverbank his breath trembled because he recognized the place instantly, and memories flooded back like waves touching the shore, and he saw himself as a child running through the grass while his mother called his name, and for a moment he felt her presence again, as if she were standing beside him watching over him with gentle eyes. Sanaa asked him if he felt happy or sad, and Amir smiled softly because he felt both, and he told her that sometimes life mixes joy and sorrow together, and we must accept both to understand who we are, and she nodded even though she did not fully understand, but her small hand holding his gave him strength. As he turned away from the river he noticed an old woman walking slowly toward them, and she stopped a few steps away staring at Amir with wide eyes as if she were seeing a ghost, and Amir felt a strange pull in his chest because she looked familiar in a distant way, and after a long pause she spoke his mother name in a trembling voice and asked if Amir was her child. Tears filled his eyes as he nodded because no one had called him by his mother name in so many years, and the woman began to cry softly, saying she had been a close friend of his mother, and she had once promised to protect her if trouble ever came, but things happened too quickly, and she could not help her, and the pain of that failure had stayed with her for decades. Amir listened carefully as the woman explained that the billionaire had once been close to his mother family, but a misunderstanding over land created a wall between them, and mistakes were made by both sides leading to fear and separation, and she believed the billionaire had tried to find Amir after realizing the damage that had been done, but by then it was too late, and too much distance had formed. The woman then told Amir something that made his breath stop, because she said his mother always believed that one day her child would return to the village and discover the truth, and she had kept a small box hidden in the house as a message for her son if he ever came searching, and Amir felt his heart race because perhaps this box held the final piece of the story he had been trying to assemble. She led Amir and Sanaa to an old house near the hill, and inside the dusty room she handed him a small metal box that had been waiting untouched for many years, and Amir opened it with shaking hands, and inside he found a note written in his mother handwriting, and a simple drawing of a small boy holding her hand, and the note explained her love, her pain, and her hope that one day Amir would know she had never abandoned him. He held the note close to his chest, feeling a deep healing inside because the question that hurt him for years had finally been answered, and Sanaa hugged him tightly, as if sensing the change in his heart, and Amir whispered that they were finally ready to move forward now that the truth had found them. As they stepped outside the house Amir felt the weight of years lift gently from his shoulders, and he realized he was no longer the man searching blindly through the pieces of his past, but someone who now carried truth, love and clarity. And he knew the next step would be to face the billionaire, who might hold the final answers about his family and his future. With Sanaa beside him, and the suitcase in his hand, Amir felt ready for whatever came next, knowing that he was no longer alone in his story, and that his mother's spirit walked with him, guiding him toward peace.